All right. Hi, everybody. Good afternoon. Welcome to today's Catheta webinar. We are currently recording and we are coming to you live on October 8th. And you are tuning in for law enforcement mitigating hazards, preparing for and responding to emergencies, and recovery strategies with William Latchford, who is president of the Native Peacekeeper Consulting Group. This is part one of a 4-part webinar series, so we hope you'll tune in for each session over the next few weeks. My name is Brooke Warrington. I'm the Training and Development Specialist at the NLC. We're also thrilled that you could join us for today's webinar. If you could follow along while I read the disclaimer aloud, this webinar provides a summary of fundamental concepts, requirements, and/or procedures within the allotted 90 minutes. The material discussed does not illustrate all possible scenarios that could be applicable. We also have our copyright infringement law pictured here. So just a friendly reminder that the webinar materials are protected by copyright, trademark, trade secret, and other intellectual property laws. And we, of course, are now on our new system that everyone is so excited about. So just a few quick tips before we get started on how you can navigate while you're on this new platform. So first, whenever you have logged in, you've joined our system, anytime there is a webinar occurring, you will see that big green banner at the top of your screen. And you can just simply click on that green banner and you will be able to join the webinar that is currently happening. When you first go to join, it's going to conduct an audio test before it brings you on. So it's helpful for us if you select the listen only option, just because if you do speak and listen, it's going to join with your microphone on, and then it does create some audio feedback issues. So if you could just join doing listen only moving forward, it makes it a lot easier on us. And we do have several ways you can interact while you are on the webinar. So if you go over to the left side of your screen, you will see a public chat available. So if you wish to participate in the public chat, you can come down here and click in that box that says send message, type in what you want to share, and then you can click on the little paper airplane button to submit it into the chat. You could click on the mic button to mute your mic if you need to. And then if you maybe have asked a question in the chat or made a comment you think maybe got missed, you could always click on this raise your hand icon to kind of draw attention to that, and we'll look to the chat to see what was said. Another fun way that you can interact during the webinar, and this is something new on this platform, if you go over to the list of users and you click on your name, you'll see the option to set a status. You could signal that you are undecided, confused, sad, happy. You could show applause, give a thumbs up, thumbs down, anything that you want, and you could change those throughout the course of the webinar. You could clear it to say nothing, totally up to you, just kind of a fun way to show how you are feeling. And then I do want to give you guys a quick heads up. We did learn that if you click on that red menu that's all the way over to the left-hand side of the screen, it does take you out of the actual webinar itself, and it'll take you to the home page of the learning platform. It'll be real easy to join. You'll just click on that green banner that's at the top of the screen. But I just want to give you a heads up, if you do click on that red menu, it is going to take you out of the actual webinar itself, and you will have to come back in. So just kind of something to keep in mind as we're on here. I also want to let you know, just below the public chat, there is something that says shared notes. If you click on that, I have already shared a bunch of links for you guys. So there's a link to today's webinar feedback survey. There's a link to register for the weekly newsletter. So I definitely recommend that now that we're on this new system, because you will be able to know when our webinars are happening and when you should log into the system to join them. But you no longer have to register for each individual webinar the way we did before. Now you just register the one time for the learning platform, and then you have access to all the webinars moving forward, which is really awesome. You can connect with us on LinkedIn. I have the link that you could save to bookmark so that you can log into the system really easy in the future. And then I also have included the link to register for Will's free emergency management training for tribal housing, and that's going to be hosted here at the Native Learning Center in November. So that link is available for you as well. But go ahead and let's try out the chat together, if you would please. If you go over to public chat, and again, you just click in that box that says send message, let us know your name, your tribal affiliation, your work or your role in Indian country, where you're joining us from. And while you guys are getting the chat going and introducing yourselves, it is with great pleasure that I introduce your webinar instructor for the day, William Latchford. And Will, I'm going to hand it off to you now.
All right, thank you, Brooke. We appreciate that introduction. Good afternoon, everybody. It's my honor today to be with you. My name is Will Latchford. I'm the president of Native Peacekeeper Consultant Group, and I welcome you to Protective Measures, Law Enforcement Strategies, Upholding NAHASDA Principles. We're excited for this first webinar, as Brooke mentioned. This is the first of 4 webinars, and then after the 4th webinar, we're going to lead into a week-long training called The Road to Readiness, Strategies, Response, and Resilience in NAHASDA Training. So that's going to be a live training down in Hollywood, Florida, and that training is going to be a 5-day training, with the 5th day incorporating a live tabletop exercise, scaled down in a classroom setting, but we're going to really test what we learned the first 4 days. So it gives a little bit of practical information and allows you to kind of test your knowledge and skills, what you learn in the class, and then what you bring to the class, and kind of collaborate with everybody in the class, so we can learn from each other and allow for that environment to continue to grow and prepare our organizations the best we can. The other 3 webinars besides today is mitigation with fire rescue, emergency management, and then community resilience and community planning when it comes to critical incidents. So we look forward to the 4 webinars starting today, and then the live training that'll be held in November. So we hope you have the opportunity to put in for that training and travel down, if you're not from the area, travel down to be part of the Road to Readiness to prepare your organizations. So before I get started, let me just put a disclaimer in regards to our organization. I'm going to go through a lot of things today on the webinar, and we can learn from each other. And what I encourage you to do is to try and take nuggets out of the information that's provided on this law enforcement webinar. And then if it contradicts with your policies and procedures of your tribe, I always put the disclaimer out that always go back to what your tribe's policies and procedures are. So training is always good, but when there's that conflict, we just want to make sure the content presented in this training, it's designed to provide comprehensive information and data and guidance for you. And in the event that something does contradict or may not align with your current policies and your procedures in your tribe, what we encourage you to do is go back to your tribe and follow those policies and procedures in your tribe. It's important that when we look at policies and procedures, that you follow your organization's policies and procedures for the success of your organization. So they're written in a manner to make you successful. They can always evolve and grow, but when you go to training, sometimes we always run into that conflict, and I encourage you to lean on the policies and procedures you have in place at your organization. A little bit about Native Peacekeeper Consultant Group. It is a Native woman certified small business owned by Amy Osceola Latchford. She's a member of the Seminole Tribe. She has put together a team of consultants. The PowerPoint says of 100 years. It's actually around 140 now, with experienced public safety consultants, retired police chiefs, special agents from the Bureau of Indian Affairs, the Federal Bureau of Investigations, and police chiefs from actually in Native country up in Canada. So we're very excited with our consultants. We think we've put a great team together that can help Indian country and any organization to enhance their ability to provide a higher level of service to their community. And that's really what it's about. We don't have all the answers, but with the experience that we bring to the table, we look at enhancing the policies, the procedures, any type of training that we can do, personal and professional development, and relationship building within the community and other public safety entities. It's about coming together and working together to be effective and continue to grow. One of the points of our business is to ensure that we bring everybody together at the table. It's about a partnership. And if you look at on the slide in the top right corner, there's, if you can see the little hand there, that's a patchwork. So that's the first patchwork in the same colors that was designed by Amy over 30 years ago when her mom taught her how to sew. And we think of patchwork as a partnership in public safety. What I mean by that is the foundation we're built on is, in order for you to build a garment that we all wear that's strong, it's not ripped, it's a secured garment that we can wear and be proud of, you have to start at patchwork. You have to start at that small piece of fabric and then sew the fabrics together, the patchworks together to make that fabric or that design piece of clothing. With that patchwork, the nexus to public safety is, in order for law enforcement to be successful, it can't do it itself. It has to have the community, it has to have the political body, it has to have the housing programs, the fire department, recreation, water resource, roads. Every tribal program has to be at the table, has to be part of that patchwork for law enforcement to be successful, along with every other program to be successful. So not one program in Indian country or even outside Indian country can be successful unless you're partnered with the programs and you're working together. No program can be in silos. We do not make success when it comes to individual silos and programs. And that's a challenge we fight throughout our careers. Is, it's sometimes it's that old saying, it's easier just to do it yourself. Well, the reality is, in order for it to be successful, you can't do it yourself. You need to take that patchwork, you need to take those programs, bring them together, and make that garment and make that success when it comes to every program to provide that high level of service to your community. So Native Peacekeeper Consultant Group is about taking and fostering community partnerships and provide a practice of evidence-based strategies to enhance their program. So we're proud and honored to be here today with you and to provide some training along with you. So as we get started today, I'm sure everybody's familiar with the current state of the hurricane that's out there in the Gulf. So I'm going to lean on some of those issues today and some of those practical things that I know law enforcement is out there doing, and also the housing programs here in the state of Florida are probably ramping up and actually getting to the point of closing out their end of the day routines to hunker down for that storm. So it gives us a great opportunity to use that as a real life example as we go through this webinar. We're going to dovetail and dive into the critical roles of law enforcement in tribal communities, and we're going to bring that nexus together on how the principles of law enforcement and NAHASDA can work together and need to work together to be successful. We'll explore how law enforcement officers can effectively address hazards, enhance safety, and uphold the rights of well-being of Native Americans while upholding the NAHASDA framework. So although law enforcement has a job to do and they have the laws to enforce, that does not negate them for working along with housing to support housing and everything housing does to keep the community safe and the housing areas safe. We want to discuss today the mitigation techniques, a couple of mitigation techniques we'll share with you as we go through, and we'll use Hurricane Milton at the forefront just because of the live scenario. And I think it's practical that we can use a situation like this. And the reality is, if it's a hurricane, a wildfire, a plane crash, or even a terrorist attack, there's a framework we all have to work off of, and being part of a team and understanding each other's program and supporting the roles from a law enforcement standpoint, supporting the roles of every other tribal program, regardless of what the critical event is paramount. So we look forward to continue to go over the PowerPoint today and providing this information to you. So So let's go into the introduction of NAHASDA and the principles in regards to law enforcement and NAHASDA. As I talked about before, we can't do this alone, and law enforcement plays a vital role in collaborating with tribal government and the communities to mitigate disasters, ensuring the safety and well-being of Native Americans in the community. NAHASDA principles are tribal self-determination and community empowerment, enabling effective partnerships between law enforcement and tribal leaders to address the disasters and the preparedness and response to the community. So again, law enforcement is just one seat at the table. However, in the role of NAHASDA, law enforcement is a critical partner to housing, and law enforcement has to recognize and understand what their role is when it comes to supporting NAHASDA and all the housing organizations. By working together, law enforcement and housing can develop initiatives and implement proactive strategies to reduce the risk, protect vulnerable populations, enhance community resilience in the face of any natural, human, or human-caused disaster. So it's important when we look at these disasters that law enforcement understands in the totality of what each disaster can impact a community and really the impacts it has on other programs. So law enforcement for many years, worked in a silo, and as society and communities grew, the opportunity for law enforcement to partner with other programs to include housing is now crucial for the success of law enforcement. So it's imperative that law enforcement understand the hazards that are out there, and then how do they fit into that partnership with housing and the work that law enforcement does. So as we talked about, or as I talked about earlier, human caused, natural disaster caused, or environmental caused hazards that we have to look at. Some of the human caused disasters would be terrorism, civil unrest, mass shootings, bomb threats, cyber attacks, transportation accidents, industrial accidents. So when you look at human caused accidents, how does that dovetail into housing? Well, if some of these issues happen within the middle of a community, at a school, or even a local business, housing is impacted. People may not realize it, but the community itself plays a big role when it comes to those impacts, and those emotions play over into a community. So it's important that law enforcement understands that, regardless of where that human caused disaster takes place, that housing and the housing area is going to be impacted because that's where the residents are. So it's important to keep that nexus to the housing organizations in the community. And that's something that, as law enforcement goes and grows, training within law enforcement when it comes to housing procedures is very important. When we look at natural disasters, there's earthquakes around the country, there's flooding, there's hurricanes, tornadoes, wildfires, blizzards, landslides, as you're seeing up in North Carolina and South Carolina. Those natural disasters can happen anywhere, and Indian country is not exempt from those type of those issues. So law enforcement plays a big role when it comes to natural disasters. So it's not necessarily investigating crimes or enforcing laws, but they become an arm to support the programs within the community. So if there is issues with flooding or even hurricanes or tornadoes or even wildfires impacting housing community, law enforcement needs to understand that hazards are crucial, and that we have to develop strategies to help and assist housing on what their mission is for them to be successful. Environmental disasters, depending on where you live, you may have chemical spills, oil spills, you may have nuclear accidents if you live near any nuclear plants, trains that come through that carry liquids that are possibly of an air or water filter disaster if they crash through the trains that go through the country. We've had some of those trains that are in the Northwest that go off the tracks, and then the community is impacted. So law enforcement's role is very important when it comes to the specific response for each area when it comes to the human caused or the natural disaster or environmental disasters. And law enforcement has the responsibility to make sure that they're prepared in each area. But not only being prepared, they have to understand what the housing all hazard plan or plan is for every area. So, and that's unique because you're putting more responsibility on law enforcement, not only just to learn the law, how the law is applied, but you're putting the responsibility on law enforcement to ensure at least they have a basic foundation of how the other programs work and how they can support those other programs. In this particular case, is housing. We'll talk about assessing the risk and vulnerabilities. We want to identify and assess risk and vulnerabilities are crucial steps in developing effective hazard mitigation plans. Law enforcement agencies working with Native American communities must understand specific hazards. This includes analyzing historical patterns of natural disasters, crime rates, community-specific risk, and cultural and religious sites that are maybe vulnerable to damage or disruption. So when we look at these areas, when we look at risk and assessment, as you know, we go through what law enforcement does. It's centered on enforcing the laws, but now there's another component of identifying and assessing risk. You know, active shooters is an active killer has been a component that now has ramped up with around the country in law enforcement in Indian country, and Indian country itself is not exempt from these critical events occurring on tribal lands. So we want to make sure that we look at where those risks are. We have to train personnel to make sure they have the knowledge and the skill and the ability to assess the risks that are in each community, because there's not one community that's the same. And as we go through the Hurricane Milton right now, you have 2 tribes in Florida that are assessing this hurricane that are impacted, and they have multiple reservations throughout the state of Florida, and each reservation is different. Their needs are different. Their risks are different, and where they're vulnerable is different. So law enforcement is having to assess where those risks are, the vulnerabilities that are there. Is it flooding that they're looking at now? Is it evacuations that have to take place? You know, some reservations are low lying here in Florida, which you have to evacuate some residents, and they have to team up with housing to make sure that those areas are secured and people are safe. So we want to make sure that all shortcomings are identified and we have a plan to address those shortcomings. A thorough risk assessment will consider the potential impacts and various hazards of the community, infrastructure, public safety, and cultural resources. You know, it's important that law enforcement understands exactly how the community's makeup is when it comes to the infrastructures, what cultural resources are out there. You know, a couple of years ago here in Florida, there was a tribal sacred ground that was off the reservation, but it was in a county that was parallel to one of the reservations, and law enforcement had to deal with some issues that were on that land, and they didn't want to disrupt the actual site. However, part of their investigation, they were going to have to disrupt it. So there had to be some mitigation done on that with the local law enforcement, because they needed to be educated on the facts of the respect of those cultural resources. And so law enforcement went in, did some roll call trainings, talked to the investigators before they went out and conducted their crime scene and did all the work on the crime scene. So law enforcement has to understand, and has gotten better over time to understand, to acknowledge and take a step back and ensure that those cultural resources and those areas that are vulnerable within tribal lands and off tribal lands are protected and respected. So, but I also recognize the fact that sometimes that doesn't happen on certain areas around the country, and we need to continue to work on that in the law enforcement profession. Just checking the messages here to make sure there's no questions on there. All right, so we want to talk about developing all hazard mitigation plans when it comes to law enforcement. So, you know, law enforcement has a lot of policies and procedures, and this can get overbearing for police officers because of, you know, they're being asked to do so much with sometimes little resources, right? And depending on where you're located around the country, you don't have, 20 to 30 police officers to respond. Sometimes you're the only police officer that's there, and your backup or another officer is 45 minutes to 2 hours away. So those are challenging, and the issue comes down to how do we figure out a succession plan to make sure that all hazards are mitigated, or at least there's a framework of all hazard mitigation plans put into place. So we want to evaluate, regardless if you're that one officer or that small department, or if you're a bigger department that has multiple officers working, nothing changes when it comes to identifying hazards. The reality is law enforcement, since they're out there 24/7, they see things. They watch the pattern of community. They watch the pattern of businesses and how people flow. And it's important that they identify hazards, regardless if it's a criminal hazard, which would be human caused, or a natural disaster hazard in case of hurricanes. So it's important to have all hazard plans and a basic foundation that police officers and your officers can work on. As we look at Hurricane Milton right now, the police officers here in Florida that I'm familiar with have the opportunity to address the all hazard plans here that are in Florida. So one of the things that I missed when I was going through the introduction is my background. And it's one of those things that it's never about me. So I'll just kind of highlight some of the things I'm talking about to give you some reference. So I retired from the Seminole Tribe of Florida, spent 30 years in law enforcement. I retired as the executive director of public safety for the Seminole Tribe of Florida. I was given the opportunity by the Seminole Tribe to work together with them to assist and work along with them to build their public safety entity. So as I progressed through my career, when I started 30 years ago, there wasn't all hazard plans. That was something never even discussed when you looked at law enforcement training. I can tell you today that the Seminole Tribe has all hazard plans, not only in law enforcement, but all of the programs, and the employees have 100% access to them. So when we look at all hazard plans from a law enforcement standpoint, and Hurricane Milton to use as a reference, they're going through right now their plans to use as a framework. Nothing is black and white, and that's one of the things that we all have to remember, is that when we get in a silo, we tend to go black and white. We follow the plan to a T. Really, we have to look at the plan as just a guide. It's a guide because as we look at this hurricane across, barreling down through the Gulf, they don't know where it's going to hit. And the Seminole Tribe and the Miccosukee Tribe, which are the two tribes in Florida, there's a potential that they're going to be impacted, and some of the tribes will have multiple locations that are impacted. So depending on where it comes on land, this is going to create some challenges for them. Well, they don't have the answers to everything, but they do have an all hazard plan that they could use as a framework to help the officers that are on the street, right? Everybody wants to know what the rules of the field are, and how the structure of the game is going to go. So when we look at law enforcement, by creating an all hazard plan and identifying those hazards that they're going to encounter, it provides the opportunity for law enforcement officers on the street to make a clear and distinctive risk assessment when they're out patrolling. They want to make sure that they can identify those weaknesses and develop, either individually with housing or other programs, or with their command staff, possible solutions that can help mitigate some of those issues. So when we look at mitigation strategies, we want to develop these plans that will outline a success that will reduce the impact of the hazard that we identify. So as we look at the, for instance, Hurricane Milton that's out there, it's a Category 4. They're indicating it's going to grow to a Category 5 before it hits land. It's supposed to downgrade to a Category 3. Regardless of the category, law enforcement has a role to play because they know there's going to be flooding. There's going to be winds that are going to get past the threshold where they're not going to be out on the street. So at 45 miles an hour, they know by their all hazard plan and their policy that they're coming off the street, and they know they won't respond to any effective areas while the hurricane is impacting the community, which means housing has to understand that, and law enforcement has to understand each policy, right? So all housing has a policy right now that they're notifying their residents on what they're going to do. They're looking at the structures. Law enforcement is right beside them in the emergency operations center, and they're having those discussions on what they're going to do. Is there a flood area that they've identified on one of the reservations? And if there is a flood area and they're expecting 15 to 16 inches of rain, what do we do with those individuals that live in that area that are going to be impacted by that 15, 16 inches of rain? So it's very important that law enforcement works together as they go through the all hazard mitigation plan for their organization, right? So their organization or program is going to have a mitigation plan, but they're only a small piece in the bigger picture of the tribe's mitigation plan. So when we look at law enforcement, we have to make sure that our plan and law enforcement is in line with the overall tribe's expectations, and then take that plan and make sure that we're developing training that allows the employees to understand exactly what their expectations are. We need to make sure that those plans are not just written. A lot of people write plans and they're put on in a book, or in this case, sometimes they're in a computer, and they're just tucked away. And then, we blow the dust off when certain things come around. The reality is it's got to become part of our life. We have to take the plan and make sure that we're developing training, and there's a constant reminder or a nugget that we're providing our staff to make sure they understand what those hazards are that they may encounter. And sometimes law enforcement forgets because they're living in crisis every day, right? So they know, like here in Florida, and I know out west you deal with tornadoes and other areas, the heat or blizzards, is that that time frame during the year when those critical weather events come. So when you look at like hurricanes, we know from June to end of November, hurricanes are going to take a potential impact in Florida. Well, the reality is that once November comes, everybody forgets about hurricanes until the following June comes around. So it's unlike a terrorist attack or an active shooter or somebody wants to commit a crime within the community, where law enforcement is so focused on enforcing the law. So we as administrators and law enforcement, we have to make sure that we identify that training that's needed. We provide the opportunity to staff to have the opportunity to take a breath, get the training. If we change policy, we train on that new policy, and we make sure that they're proficient in the policy. So I'm a big advocate that, when we do training, it's not just to pass a test, right? So we should be training so the individuals that are in the room are retaining the information. It becomes part of their natural everyday life. And a lot of times, because of social media and things that happen in our lives, we navigate towards just understanding those key points. Well, we want to make sure that law enforcement doesn't just take the easy way out. We need to make sure that the training law enforcement is provided stays at the forefront. And that's where it comes down to where law enforcement is asked to do a lot more than previous in the profession. But we, as administrator of law enforcement, we need to make sure that those policies are clear and they're trained on with the understanding that they do evolve. Policies, again, are a framework that evolve, and we need to make sure that the staff understands that we're going to support them when they do change. We'll support them and provide them that training needed to make sure they're proficient to do their job. Some of the areas in hazard mitigation is as law enforcement deals with crises that occur. It's not an everyday situation. The issue with the hurricane, for example, is you have a hurricane coming, crime doesn't stop. So law enforcement has to understand that it's their opportunity to go in overdrive with their position, right? So on an average day, they know they have their patrol techniques that they're out there to prevent crime. That's their sole mission that they're out there doing on an average day when there is no crisis. Well, when mitigation comes in, usually there's a crisis that they have to deal with. So they need to go above and beyond and put their profession into overdrive. So what they're going to do is they're going to take visibility presence. So they want to make sure that they're continue the visibility to make sure they're preventing crimes. Although there's a hurricane coming barreling down on the state of Florida, crime is still happening. You know, as the average citizen is trying to determine should they stay or go, there's also individuals out there that are preying on their livelihood. They're preying on individuals to say, okay, if they're going to go, then I can break into their house. No one's going to know that I'm in there because the owner left, right? So law enforcement has to understand that when the hazard is going on, that the normal criminal element is still out there. So that's something law enforcement cannot forget. How do they address these issues? Same as what they're doing on an average day. They just have to put that gear into overdrive. They have to be more visible, more present in the community, more teamwork when it comes to the average program. Following up with the housing program. It's important to do foot patrols if you're in an area where you can do foot patrols, bike patrols. Be out in the community more so people see you. You want to keep the community in a position where emotions are down, and your service is what's going to keep them grounded, right? So if they see a police officer coming down the street and patrolling, or even stop out with residents and just have a nice conversation, you're going to have that community on your side, and you want to build that relationship with community engagement, because that's part of success when it comes to developing mitigation tactics during a crisis. So law enforcement just needs to recognize the fact that their job really doesn't change. What happens is during a hazard is it ramps up. It ramps up where their expectations are now going to be higher to make sure they deliver that high level of service with the techniques that they already have in place. So they're not developing new patrol techniques. They're actually ramping those patrol techniques up to make sure that the community is taken care of, and that the residents in the community, along with the programs, know that law enforcement is out there and they have the opportunity to continue to partner, but law enforcement is ramped up to continue to make the community safe. We want to do this through effective communication. So when we do effective communication, there's a couple areas and a couple levels that we look at. One of the biggest thing in Indian country is we want to make sure that we build that trust and rapport, not just with tribal leaders, but with the community. But one layer is to make sure that the tribal leaders are informed when it comes to when you ramp up and there is a hazard in the community. That dialogue with the politicians is very important. And the reason why, just like every community on the reservation or off the reservation, is people call politicians because they're comfortable and they want answers and they deserve answers. Well, you want to make sure you arm the tribal leaders with what you're doing and what, from a law enforcement standpoint, what posture that you're taking to prioritize the safety of the community. So if you can continue that constant communication, arm the tribal leaders with the information, is one aspect of it, right? So when they talk to the community, the tribal leaders, they have the opportunity to pass along the messaging that you're providing them. And they can instill a sense of confidence in the community from a tribal leadership standpoint. They can instill calm and reserve and support if you provide that communication to the tribal leaders. Now, I say that with the tribal leaders are not to do your job for you. It's your job in law enforcement. You're the subject matter experts. So the communication should be on a briefing aspect to where you're arming the tribal leaders the opportunity to take care of their constituents. Communication is key to any success. The second part of communication is with keeping open channels with the community, right? So it's not just about the leaders, it's about the community, right? That's the people who you serve and really the foundation of what makes you successful. So it's important that law enforcement recognizes they use those resources to communicate with the community, to make sure that you're building that trust, and you're building that sense of comfort with the community. One thing that is crucial is to understanding your community, understanding each area when it comes to the cultural sensitivity or even their beliefs and what their perspectives are. One of the things I learned in Seminole is that although it's one tribe, you have different communities that have different levels of expectations, and that's great. That's normal. But as a police officer, you have to understand that when you go from one community to the other, you have to understand the community that you're going to. It's not your world. You're coming into a world that you have to understand what those expectations are. And so to avoid any types of stereotypes or disrespectfulness within a community, you have to understand what those cultural sensitivities are. And by doing that is creating an opportunity and a pathway for building trust and open lines of communication. For example, one of the things that we would do during hurricanes is we'd do a community call. So although you would talk to the politicians would understand what was happening in regards to the storm, then you'd have a community call. So it gives the opportunity for the same information to be passed to the community. Although they have the news, they have the internet, you are able to provide opportunities for them to get their questions out, to get their worries out, to talk about some of the things and proactive methods that you're doing when it comes to mitigating hazards, right? So if it's a storm, if it's an active shooter situation, everybody wants to know the information. Everybody wants to know what's happening in the community. And the reality is law enforcement should be able to provide a foundation to each community that provides the opportunity to where it dispels any type of rumors and it gives comfort that a community is safe. So it's important that law enforcement recognizes what those channels are to keep open communications with each community that they serve, and understanding all the nuances that go with each community. My email is in the public chat. This is our challenge coin that's here. If you would like one of our challenge coin, just please shoot me an email and with your address, and I'll be glad to send a challenge coin off to you. I apologize for the words. Some of the words are jumbled together on the screen because of the format of my slide, so I apologize for that. This is de-escalation and interpersonal skills during crises. It's important for law enforcement to listen to the community, right? Law enforcement is a very strong profession that deal with a lot of problems. And one of the key components of success is active listening to make sure we understand what the community's perceptions are and what their overall outlook is. So it's important to pay attention to verbal and nonverbal cues to the community, and acknowledging their feelings, right? So law enforcement, one of the things that I learned early on in my career 30 years ago is law enforcement officers are products of society. We're no better than anybody else. We just have been blessed to have the opportunity to protect the community 24 hours a day and to do a profession that really is service oriented. And we need to recognize from a law enforcement standpoint that listening to your community and trying to dissect that dialogue to allow the community to have a voice is very important. We want to teach the police officers how to be in a position to de-escalate any type of agitation within the community. It's important that police officers understand and they have the de-escalation techniques. And this isn't a one-off. It shouldn't be just train once and let go. It has to be constant part of the behavior of police officers. They understand that they have to be calm in the presence of any hazard and the voice of reason, right? Sometimes they have to measure their tone or escalate their tone in a manner that they can continue to support the environment, but keep the environment encouraged, keep the communication open, and provide the opportunity for the residents to understand what's happening, but also have the confidence in law enforcement that things are being taken care of and things are being handled. Sometimes the emotions get escalated, which destroy the trust, destroys the relationship, and that's what we want to try and avoid, right? And by training the police officers to be experts in de-escalation techniques when it comes to verbal and nonverbal communication is very important. We want to make sure that law enforcement keeps a non-threatening posture, right? There's some times where you have to have that threatening posture because there may be a threat in the community. But if we communicate what the roles are, if we communicate what those issues are to the community and provide them the foundation, then we're on the same page, right? Sometimes the community may not like what the police officers say or the position that we're taking, but if we talk about it, and we can describe it and get them to take a moment, just like we have to take a moment in law enforcement to recognize where we're at, right? So if we recognize where we're at and use each other as support, then we won't run into this us against them. We won't run into the fact of not working together or being in silos. Just like we have to work with housing as a team, we have to work with the community. And if we understand each other's roles, and sometimes it takes us in law enforcement to step back and recognize, you know, maybe we should put another messaging out so the community understands where we're at. That's very important when it comes to mitigating hazards and how we can respond to emergencies, right? Because every emergency that's in the community, it's the community's emergency, and we want to make sure the community is safe, but we also want to make sure the community is on the same side as us and law enforcement as we go to make sure that the all hazard is taken care of. As we look at communication, as we know, social media has a big play in information, right? Law enforcement is at a disadvantage because things happen, and before the word can get out from law enforcement, social media is already posting it, right? Now, social media is putting cameras, with the cameras out there, it's putting pictures in the environment. People are giving their opinions, and sometimes that slants the initial discussion when it comes to how a hazard is viewed in the community. So what I stress to you and everybody on the WebEx is that, you know, we don't get a second chance for a first impression. And sometimes when we're reading social media, we take it for gospel. What I encourage everybody is take a breath, you know, let the officials come out with the official statement before we draw any type of conclusion on any critical event or hazard that's out there, because you're not going to get the full picture just by somebody posting a picture on social media or somebody coming on and putting their opinion out there. It may be in parallel and there may be some truth there, but let the officials come out and provide that statement, knowing that there's something else happening that may not be described in what you're reading on social media. Responding to emergencies and critical incidents, law enforcement officers must be prepared to respond effectively to a wide range of critical events that happen in tribal communities. Again, as we talked about, those events range from active shooters, they range from hostage situations that may occur, wildfires, hurricanes that are out there. And when we look at responding to these emergencies, we need to make sure there's coordinated effort. We need to make sure that we work closely, not just with housing, but we need to make sure that we work closely with fire departments, medical personnel, the clinics that are on the reservation. And it's critical. It is so critical that we understand what that initial assessment is while we're securing the scene and providing assistance. We need to make sure that the critical component of this, those other programs, are involved in collaboration to maintain order, right? So sometimes we need the clinic to step up and work with us on a scene that you know, housing may not be involved in. So each area of a tribe programs is going to have a significant piece when it comes to responding to critical incidents in the community. Each program just has to understand what their responsibilities are, right? In the case of law enforcement, we're not always going to be in the front, but we need to recognize we don't work in a silo either. We need to recognize that by having all hazard plans, it's going to remove some of the stress because we have a framework that we can work off of. And this is where our job descriptions may not articulate exactly what we're supposed to do. But however, our all hazard plan is going to articulate the fact that we're to support these other programs and take ownership of that partnership with these other programs when we do the response and we look at what our role is when it comes to that collaboration. It's so important to have these all hazard plans for every program, because if the police officers understand what the role of housing is, what the role of education is, what the role of the clinics are, they work really kind of every day with fire rescue. So there's a good component where they already know the fire rescue piece. But when they're doing the initial assessment securing a scene, if they know the roles of these other programs, then it's seamless, because they can make these phone calls. They can notify the housing representative to either respond or what those expectations will be to ensure that whatever assistance is needed to assist in that critical event, then it's already moving, right? Things don't stop. They continue to progress to the success to get back to normalcy. Really, at the end of the day, the key for everybody is taking that critical event and getting through it successfully to provide that foundation to get back to a sense of normalcy. And if you have the understanding of what the other tribal programs do, you can, as a law enforcement officer, you can work on the fly and you can start forecasting what really needs to happen, what programs need to be involved, and how you're going to collaborate with those programs. Coordinating with tribal emergency services, again, it's very important that the communication channels stay open. Usually in settings, law enforcement and fire rescue are always together. But there's another component when it comes to emergency management. Emergency management's role is really a communication role that is unique to every community. So I have the philosophy that there is not one textbook that fits perfectly into a community. So when we look at the foundation of our emergency plans, we need to take what that model is, if it's FEMA or if it's the state that you live in, take those plans and make them work for you. Don't just take the cookie cutter model and just change the name at the top and change the organization and then put your stamp of approval on it. Take those plans, turn them around, look at them, be very critical about it, and use that foundation of the plan to make a successful plan for you. It's important that you look at the plans, because the plans were developed from a general foundation that everybody can work off of, because there's not one plan that's going to fit in a square peg, right? There's square hole, square peg. It doesn't work that way. So you want to take those plans and you want to make sure that you use those plans and you develop your plans with the foundation involved. So at Seminole, one of the things that we did was a couple of years ago, there was an issue with some of the general employees. All the acronyms started to become an issue of learning all the acronyms. So what we did, we just went plain talk. We got rid of the acronyms. And so the EOC was built on what the everyday language was for the tribe. Well, that's not necessarily the framework model that's out there in a black and white and everybody pushes. But the reality is it worked for Seminole. It became the opportunity to where people could sit in a room and have plain talk and didn't have to worry about learning all the acronyms that are out there, because some professions, quite honestly, don't work in acronyms, right? In law enforcement, fire rescue, emergency management, maybe in hospitals, there's acronyms that you use every day you get used to. Well, buildings and grounds, water resource, roads, they don't necessarily use acronyms. And there's times where the individuals in their professions, they don't have time to learn all those acronyms. So what we did was we went into the position of, okay, let's just bring everybody down to the same level of playing field, stop using acronyms, and just plain talk. Just sit and have conversations, because the subject matter experts in the room, which were all the programs in the Joint Operations Center and the EOC, we provided that opportunity to have them in the same room, sitting next to each other, shoulder to shoulder. That provided them the opportunity just to have discussions, right? Just to have normal plain talk. And they were able to be successful carrying out missions, because they didn't have to worry about, okay, what does that mean? What does this acronym mean? You know, keep it simple, right? So I would encourage all of you to, when you develop these all hazard plans and coordinating with your EOCs, is that make it work for you. Make whatever that environment is work for you. Build those plans up, and then take those plans and train on those plans, right? That's how you get to that next level. Take those plans and train on them, right? Not just once, but constantly do training, constantly bring people together in different training scenarios. If it's an hour a month, or if you can do a large scale tabletop exercise twice a year, bring people together, even if it's showing videos on WebExes and situations like this, SharePoint sites where you can bring people together to have just normal discussions. So when that big crisis takes place and the emergency is hit, and you have to switch the flip the switch, you want to make sure that the panic is not set in with employees. And so it's important to train on your plans to make sure that your employees understand. So to me, what I would suggest and advise is that keep it simple, because it can get convoluted with all the terminologies and with everything going on. And you have to understand that living in crisis, law enforcement officers live in crisis every day. They can turn it on and turn it off. Fire rescue, you're waiting for the bell to ring. You're waiting for that call to happen. Normal professions don't have that. For the law enforcement personnel that are on the scene, you know, I would encourage you to ensure that your housing departments, that you understand their roles, and try to mitigate and take what you know and bring it together in collaboration with the housing department, so your mindset and their mindset can collaborate and come together. Because on an average day, they don't think like we think, and we certainly don't think like they think. So we have to take those two worlds and try to bring them together. And so by doing that all up front before the hazard takes place is really what is going to create that layer of success for everybody involved. Evacuation procedures and sheltering, it's important during an all hazard that this is also taken care of. You want to do mock training when it comes to when you build out your specific evacuation plans, the way the evacuation routes are going to take place. This is important because especially when you're dealing with crises, and you know you're ramping the shelters up and maybe nobody goes to the shelter, and then people just get used to the shelter opening and nobody going there. So employees can take that laissez-faire mentality because no one's coming to the shelter. It's very important to have the constant conversation about, if this happens, what do we do? If this happened last time, nobody showed up, are we going to do the same thing? And why should we do the same thing? It's important that you have those discussions, and it's very simple to take the easy way out. So I can't stress to you enough from a law enforcement side is don't take the easy way out. Never take the easy way out, because you're hurting the community. You're hurting the people you serve. Evacuation routes, I will tell you, like here in Florida right now, they've opened up the shoulder of the roads. They don't have the roads that they just go one way. We haven't flipped that switch yet to where everybody goes a certain direction. But they did open the shoulder of the roads up. And so now you have, instead of a 3-lane road, you have a 5-lane road, and the speed limits have de-escalated down to make sure everybody's safe. That is done because there's a policy in place. There was discussions with the Florida Highway Patrol and other law enforcement entities. And so when the messaging goes out to the community then it's very clear on what the expectations are of the drivers that are on the road. Let alone what's out there is troopers are out there, law enforcement personnel are out there, and they're mitigating some of the bad drivers that are out there that want to still drive at 80 miles an hour on a highway. They have to recognize that although these lanes are open, there's still danger there because those lanes aren't really meant on an average day to be traveling along. So we want to make sure that that information is communicated not just to the bosses. We want to make sure that the frontline personnel from a law enforcement standpoint understand that expectation. They understand really what those procedures are for evacuations. And then we want to look at sheltering. So let's talk about sheltering for a second. You want to look to make sure that there's always law enforcement at a shelter. A shelter is an area that we want to make sure it's not disruptive. We don't want to have any issues there. People's emotions are already escalated because they've had to leave their home. Usually shelters aren't too comfortable. So we want to make sure that the environment is sterile and that the environment is conducive to just adjusting to that environment, right? So we have elderly that may go into a shelter. People may bring their pets. So law enforcement has to understand there's a big component there that they become the police or the enforcer just to make sure there's good behavior there. We want to work together with the shelter staff to make sure that the behavior in the shelter is not escalating or adding more stress to the actual hazard. And I understand this is going to impact when we look at this planning. We're going to look at the allocation of personnel. So you want to look at this in advance. You want to write these policies in advance because it does take manpower to do some of these issues, to ramp up and allow law enforcement to be in a position to man some of these posts. If you don't have the manpower, then I would suggest is you still have to have these conversations. You still have to be able to write these plans. However, then you prioritize where your law enforcement assets are going to go. You may want to hire security to be in a shelter or even deputize some residents in the community, not with arrest powers, but you can give them some civilian authority to where they're inside your shelter and they become really the component to really make sure that your shelter is safe, and that authority figure that is going to man the shelter. So sometimes you want to rely on the cultural aspect to where the authority figure within the culture can be that person where you don't need the law enforcement officer there, and the law enforcement officer, if you don't have the resources, can be deployed to an area that is needed within the community that's more prioritizing. As I talked about earlier, the crime doesn't stop. So law enforcement has to remember that they have to stick to their foundation when it comes to crime. You want to make sure that you do not put yourself in a position to lower the standard of your job. So I can't encourage you enough that from a law enforcement standpoint, although hazards are going to occur, you do not want to de-escalate in what your expectations are in that service you provide to the community. You should always provide your service at a high level, and that means preserving or securing a crime scene. You want to make sure you always do your job at the highest level. You always do your job the way it's supposed to be done, and to ensure that you have integrity when it comes to the work product that you're delivering. So that ranges from securing a crime scene, the documentation, the writing of police reports, the collecting of evidence. You want to make sure that you provide that opportunity to deliver that high level of service to the community you serve. At the end of the day, regardless of what's happening in the community or society, citizens deserve the highest level of police service, either from enforcing the law, just customer service, or community policing. You deserve, or the community deserves you as the police officer to make sure that you're providing that high level of service. So, and that includes that partnership with the programs that are in your community. One of the things that's constant is, providing first aid and medical assistance. It's imperative you stay on top of the first responder needs of administering CPR, or stopping, controlling the bleeding. Traditionally, every law enforcement officer has first aid kits. They have the minimal amount of first aid or medical assistance, and that's collaborating with the fire rescue or even your clinics that are on your reservation. During all hazards, it's important when you write your plans to incorporate, again, we're raising that level of anxiety when a hazard takes place. So sometimes having a plan to where you can coordinate your assets. So you have clinics that you may want to ask the clinic staff to ride along with you, right? So you have an all hazard or crisis in the community, you may want to ask the clinic people to ride with you. So that way you have another layer of medical assistance that's with you. Ask the fire department to place somebody in the police car. There's nothing wrong with a police officer riding around with a fire rescue or a fireman in the police car to provide that extra collaboration when it comes to providing that service to the community. Sometimes we lock ourselves into, what I learned in my career is we lock ourselves into the profession. And the reality is part of the profession is working together and ensuring that, we're using those resources that we have at our fingertips, and we're maximizing those resources. And I know throughout my career, I saw the looks on people's faces, especially as an administrator, when you say, hey, put a fireman in the police car, let a fireman, take their bag with them, put them in a police car. So that way, when you respond, you have that opportunity to use that fire asset right there. And they can provide, those subject matter experts can provide information to you as a police officer where you're not waiting for them to come. They can be the true first responder, and you just happen to be with them when they go there. So it's important when you write your plans that you incorporate the first responder and the medical assistance people when it comes to writing those law enforcement plans and mitigating these issues from a law enforcement standpoint. It's one of those things that's unorthodox. It's not necessarily the primary thought that everybody has, but through this training, I promote, the fact that sometimes we have to think outside the box, and our professions have their technical way we do things, but that's not always the right answer when it comes to hazards. So I can't encourage you enough to figure out what works for your community, but take into account that sometimes you want to put another profession in that front seat of the police car. And when we look at housing, what advantage you have is that if you take that housing personnel and you put them in the front of the police car and you drive around the housing community talking to the residents, showing that the housing people and the law enforcement personnel are shoulder to shoulder dealing with a hazard or an issue in the community, showing the support for the community to make sure the community is successful. So law enforcement shouldn't be in a position to where, again, being in a silo. They should have that teamwork approach, and putting those individuals in the police car with you, in my professional opinion, is a success when it comes to dealing with some of the all hazards that are out there. Trauma-informed approach for victim support. It's very important that we recognize that as we go through, the all hazard, that people are not, it's not the norm for people to deal with crisis. In law enforcement and other public safety professions, we deal with crises. It's very important that we look at the fact that we recognize that, there's still victims out there. They may be a victim of the natural disaster, and so we need to ensure that we identify that, and we support them and support the sensitivity of what they're facing and those challenges they're going through. And if you have law enforcement leaders that are on this WebEx, I can't encourage you enough that you also have to incorporate the same trauma-informed approach with your staff, and your housing directors. Your housing directors, the housing folks go through a lot. And when communities' emotions are high and they're raised, sometimes emotions come out and people are treated wrong. It's not on purpose. It's not on like a malicious way, but that still has an impact on the compassionate care of people. So I can't encourage you enough to when you write your plans, look at the fact of trauma-informed training for your staff to be able to provide them with the resources that are needed to able to go through to get to the other side. Because sometimes our emotions get the better of us, and some people are at the other end of that. So we want to make sure that when we look at all hazard plans, that we put into account the fact that we want to take care of people. We want to make sure that we address the trauma that they may be going through. It may not be physical trauma, it could be mental trauma. So we want to make sure that we have self-care, compassionate care, and we can support not just the community or the housing personnel or other programs, but the law enforcement personnel too, because sometimes what they see is not necessarily the norm. And we want to make sure that they have self-care and they are provided those same resources so they can heal and rebuild in their life and their family life. So we want to promote safety and well-being and provide a sense of fostering of hope and resilience, because that's what it's about: being resilient, building the community up, building our staff up, building that relationship up to make sure that we can continue and move on past the crisis. Restoring order and community resilience. This is an area that's very important for addressing the immediate needs. Law enforcement must prioritize addressing the immediate needs like safety and security. It might also establish temporary shelters, providing food and water, coordinating medical assistance. It's crucial, again, to get back to some sort of normalcy for the community. So how do we do that? We put that in our plans, again, starting the framework of how we're going to secure the community, where those positions are going to be, where we stage the personnel, where we stage our staff to make sure the community is safe. And housing environments, we may have to block off the housing area and not let housing residents in because of the condition. However, by blocking that off, that's going to create emotion. That's going to create some people that have anxiety because their possessions are inside those homes. Well, maybe we can address that and mitigate that by having a shelter nearby where we're providing water, providing food, medical assistance to kind of calm their anxiety, to make sure that we're supporting them, right? We want to support the community. We want them engaged in what we're doing. We want them to support our mission. Sometimes they just don't understand, and communication and providing that opportunity so they have the opportunity to voice their concerns, but also the opportunity to hear your updates and hear the progress of whatever's happening, and the updates of the crisis is important for them, because at the end of the day, they just want to go back to their homes. They just want to be able to be with their families, and a critical hazard has a severe impact on breaking up people's normalcy. So we want to make sure that we're there to support that from a law enforcement standpoint, and we want to do it collectively. You can't do it by yourself, so you have to work with all the programs to make sure that you provide those opportunities to support the community. Again, it's about supporting long-term recovery and building resilience from a community standpoint, not only from an infrastructure, economic recovery, but also the emotional recovery. Law enforcement plays a crucial role in coordinating relevant agencies, advocating for resources, and ensuring the long-term safety and security of the community. It's important when you create your plans for law enforcement that there's a component in there that you work with your family services, your behavioral health components, the crisis counselors, because when you have all hazards, law enforcement, you're going to identify people in the community that will need that long-term recovery. And if you have in your plan, you have the program that deals with supporting the community, you have the opportunity to make that phone call and get that person support right away as soon as you come across them. So you want to make sure that the goal is to get back to normalcy, but through that goal is how are you going to do it? How are you going to provide that support to your community? And one of the aspects that you can utilize through that is just through your messaging of communication. You can use Code Red, the message Code Red application. You could go door to door. You can put signs up through the community. If the power's up, you can use email and text messaging. So you want to make sure whatever's in your plan, that not only the programs understand what's in your plans when it comes to building that resiliency, you want to make sure that the community also understands that there's resources or there is a plan available that they're just not going to see the first time when you have that hazard. One of the things that I would talk about is damage assessment and infrastructure. And this is really something that may not work in some areas. It will work in a lot of areas, is the initial phase of law enforcement going out right after the critical event. If you have a tornado, you have a hurricane, a wildfire, usually public safety are the people that are out there doing that first assessment, damage assessments. They can provide key information. If they understand what their expectations are, you can, when they're out there protecting the community, they can deliver back really what the infrastructure map looks like, right? They can tell you what roads are closed, what bridges are closed or damaged, what buildings are damaged, and they can provide that opportunity. I would suggest to you, and one of the areas that that I like using is there's a company called Secure Passage that's out there. That's an organization, and if you can look their website up at securepassage.com, that's an organization that really builds a platform, and there's several of them out there. I'm particular to Secure Passage. They build a program that not only deal with damage assessments, but critical infrastructure and risk assessments, threat assessments for schools, for businesses, for really high-end areas that when you look at the risks and the vulnerabilities of communities, they build their program to work for you, make it easier for you, and they have a program that you can go out and do damage assessments on a tablet, and everything is based on the format of the FEMA requirements. So if you're going to file from a housing standpoint, you're going to go through FEMA. Law enforcement can be that initial response to where they can go out, use this program, take pictures on a tablet, download the reports on the tablet, and really you have your foundation that will help you navigate some of the FEMA issues to make it easier for you. What I would say, work harder, not smarter. Work smarter, not harder. I apologize. Work smarter, not harder. And that's something that I think is important because you don't want to be out there days on end doing the same thing. It becomes an emotional process for you. So one of the things you want to look at is when you build your plan, what are those vital services that you're going to need, and how do you restore that? Well, you can build that up when you do your infrastructure damage assessment. Then you have a clear picture on what needs to be done. So a lot of times this is challenging because it's not necessarily the norm. But I will tell you, I'm a component to where very supportive of, with law enforcement going out and doing those initial damage assessments, because it gives you really a foundation of what you're working towards and what you have to work for to do the repairs and get people back to normalcy. So again, I would recommend you to look at Secure Passage. It's PASSAGE. First word is secure. And it's an opportunity. Again, there's different programs out there, but Secure Passage I've found to be very successful when it comes to damage assessments and infrastructure. So those are key components you can provide in your all hazard plan, especially from a housing standpoint and a law enforcement standpoint. You can work together to do those initial infrastructures, and it's a one-stop shop. You don't have to have 15 different programs. You can have one program that both it provides that opportunity for police reports, and it also provides the opportunity where you can pull the housing reports, turn it into emergency management, and then FEMA accepts that foundation. So it's something that you can really benefit from when you build your all hazard plan. Debris removal and environmental remedies. What I would tell you is where law enforcement's aspect in this is sometimes debris removal companies don't show up. And so that has a hazard in the community where law enforcement has roads blocked. You know, what do you do with those opportunities when it comes to building your all hazard plan where debris removal is an issue, right? So law enforcement needs to recognize that they need to communicate with the people who are in charge from the tribe side as far as your debris removal, communicate with housing because the roads may be blocked, the community may be in danger, there may be some debris that you don't want kids around, which is going to have an environmental impact. So law enforcement wants to be able to be at the seat, have a seat at the table to develop strategies to support the component, whoever's dealing with the debris removal. So roadways are definitely a hazard when it comes to debris. So law enforcement, again, has to be at the table when you're building these programs and you're building these all hazard plans. Coordination is very important when it comes to debris removal. And so I encourage you, if you don't have law enforcement at the table when you're building your plan out for debris removal for your housing complexes, put law enforcement at the table so they can help you and support you as you go through your process and building your framework out. Disaster and recovery, funding assistance. What I would tell you is FEMA is very good, but at the same point, they're a support to you, right? So one of the things, if you build your plans out and you understand how things are going to unravel on a hazard, for most hazards that you can plan on, FEMA is there. They're going to support you through the process. So I encourage you to, from a law enforcement standpoint, know the roles of FEMA. Housing, from a housing standpoint, get with your emergency management of the tribe. And when you have these critical events like Hurricane Milton that's here, FEMA is on the ground with the tribe. They're there. They're sitting at the seat at the EOC, and they're engaged. And that's where the supports come in. So you do your state of emergency for the tribal state of emergency. You file the declaration of emergency through the federal government, and then that opens the door for resources, that opens the door for funding, and you're doing that all in advance. So as we look at Hurricane Milton, I know the tribes are going through the process. They've engaged their tribal state of emergency. They've applied for the declaration of emergency, and FEMA is on the ground, and those resources can be provided to you before the storm. And it also creates the opportunity for funding sources to open up to where you're not having to worry about those funding sources. You can navigate them and navigate the priorities instead of worrying about money because FEMA is there. They're going to support you through that process. Quickly, I'll go through, collaboration is very important. Sharing information with your all hazard plans. You want to make sure, again, you share the information not only with the housing and other programs. You want to make sure you're sharing it with other law enforcement or public safety personnel that you're going to be working with. It's imperative that you have those opportunities before the crisis hits, that they understand what the framework is. So you should be communicating your plans with those agencies that are going to come and help you from a law enforcement standpoint on exactly what's happening. BIA law enforcement has responded down to the Seminole Tribe numerous times when it comes to hurricanes, and before they get there, they understand what the plans are because we've shared the plans with BIA, and so when the officers hit the ground, they understand what to expect. And so they can hit the ground and they can take care of the community, and nobody in the community suffers. Incorporating tribal traditions and practices. It's important that as you navigate your plans, that you take this into consideration and understand the environment that you're in. You want to make sure that you look at the tribal practices and don't offend the tribal cultural practices. You want to make sure you build your plans around that to sustain and build a stronger relationship with the community you're serving. Mental health resources are important. Again, I touched on this earlier: stress management, counseling, therapy, and peer support for your employees. It's very imperative that as you go through your hazards, again, law enforcement are products of community, and they're human beings too. So they see things that the average person may not see. And it's important that you provide stress management, counseling, therapy, and peer support, and that the staff understands that it is there for them if they need it. Wellness and training. Again, a wellness program, again, not when the crisis is hitting, but you want to make sure you have a steady wellness program that addresses some of these issues, because if they understand how to deal with the stress when the hazard escalates their environment and their emotions, that they're going to be in a better position to deal with it. When crises are happening, people tend to change their behavior, and we want to make sure from a law enforcement standpoint that our law enforcement personnel don't change their behavior in a manner to where it's going to affect the service that they're providing. Again, training and education, that's a constant. We want to do that throughout the year. And law enforcement crisis is part of law enforcement officers' daily lives, but we don't want to take that for granted. So we want to make sure that the support is there, the training is there, and the education is there. When we look at our all hazard plans, once we have them, we want to make sure that they're not, again, put on the shelf. We want to make sure that we're reviewing. I skipped the slide, sorry. When we look at training and professional development, we want to make sure we look at specialized skills. Not everybody can be trained to be tactical, and so you want to make sure that you look at the specialized training, the emergency response, the trauma-informed care, and the collaboration and communication. Sometimes you have to parcel those out to either internally or externally, but you want to make sure they're in your framework of your plan. To make sure that it can be taken care of. So you may have just a team of officers that deal with trauma-informed care, and these officers are the ones that are going to support not only the community members, but they're going to work with the healers in the community to assist the community themselves, and also the police officers or housing staff that are working. Reviewing and updating emergency plans. That's very important, that when you build your emergency plan from a law enforcement standpoint, that it's a fluid document. We don't want to just build the document and say, okay, here it is. It's not a book on a shelf. It's a book on a shelf that continues to change and evolves to improve. We want to make sure that that improvement continues. And when we're sharing the plans, we want to make sure that we gather feedback. And sometimes it's hard to hear what you don't want to hear. So you want to make sure that you gather feedback, listen to the feedback, evaluate the feedback, update your plans, and then you train on the updated plans. You want to make sure anytime you change that plan that you're training on it, you're sending out orders on it, and also you may be doing tabletop exercises on it to collaborate. So when you look at your plans, you want to know whoever you need to send that plan to when the change is made, because housing may have your old plan. You may have updated your plan, you may have trained the plan, but you didn't send it to housing. So you want to make sure you have a checklist to ensure that whenever you change the plan, there's the people that are outside the organization get the plan, they get the message, and also they can train on the plan as well when they get their new plan, so they can train their employees on what to expect when you roll up on scene. Again, we want to learn from everything we go through, right? We're challenged in adversity. So how we get better and how we deal with humans is when we go through that adversity. So we want to make sure that we have continued feedback provided to us. We want to do ongoing training. We want to continue to improve and look at the data, and we want to analyze the data to make sure that our strategies are built on the best practices that are out there. So although we don't like living in crisis. Sometimes that crisis provides an opportunity for us to grow. And through that growth and collaboration and listening to the community, we can build a very good core foundation that will provide a high level of service to the community. The key takeaways, we want to make sure that as we move forward in law enforcement, that our principles meet the NAHASDA principles, right? So a couple of the areas where law enforcement and NAHASDA collaborate together is improve housing security. We can assist in community stability. We want to ensure a safe housing environment. Community development is so important. Law enforcement at the table when we develop community space. It could reduce juvenile delinquency. Again, collaboration is very important. Resource allocation, we can assist. There's a lot of money out there in law enforcement that can help housing developments, and we can assist when it comes to resource allocation. Economic development, as far as a crime-related neighborhood, we can impact negatively if crime continues to escalate in communities. We can impact the environment to where the environment is leaning towards poverty. We want to make sure that we continue to stress the fact that we want safe communities. Cultural sensitivities, infrastructure development, training programs, crime prevention programs, building community trust, and also information sharing. A lot of times law enforcement, there's funding out there that we can help with juvenile programs, crisis management programs in your housing authorities, violence reduction, and also monitoring. We can monitor through cameras that are put up on in the community. That's very important that law enforcement is an integral part of housing's overall all hazard plan and daily plan. The reality is although that we are different programs, different professions, law enforcement can support housing, and housing can support law enforcement to where both professions strive to provide a high level of service to the community they serve. Policy development, and again, federal support is something that is out there, that where NAHASDA and law enforcement come together. In closing, this is just some of the things that Native Peacekeeper Consultant Group does. Will help you with developing your community safety plans, program development and compliance review, patchwork partnership, community partnership will come in, do risk assessments for you, staff training, emergency management planning, executive coaching and mentoring, crisis management, mental health and wellness, and we'll do research services if that's something you're looking for. Today, I just want to thank you for providing the opportunity to share this information for you. I know you'll get a copy of this PowerPoint, and the words won't be jumbled together. Let us journey together in promoting a safety across Indian country for a safer and promising tomorrow. On behalf of the ownership of Native Peacekeeper Consulting Group and all the consultants, I want to thank you for what you do. From a housing perspective, I learned throughout my career that it's very important for law enforcement to have that relationship with the housing programs within a community, because a community cannot be successful when programs are working in silos. And law enforcement is just a seat at the chair, seat at the table, and a chair that is important, but just as important as every other chair that's at that table. So I thank you. I thank you for the opportunity today, and that'll conclude my presentation.
All right, thank you so much for your presentation, Will. This was so thorough. Everybody, before you exit the live class, if you could please look to the chat. I have put today's webinar feedback survey link for you into the chat. Just takes a couple of minutes to fill out. It helps us know what's working well, what we can improve upon, and you can even give your feedback about what you think of the new platform. So again, that link is for you already in that public chat. We hope that you will be able to join us a little later this week on Thursday when we have our next webinar This one's going to be about HUD's guidance on the use of AI and housing applications. This is going to be given by Vince Franco. Our times have not changed, so it'll be 2 p.m. Eastern, 1 p.m. Central, 12 p.m. Mountain, 11 a.m. Pacific, and 10 a.m. Alaska. And as I said in the introduction, for anybody who missed it, y'all just have to register for the platform one time, and then moving forward, you will have access to all of the webinars that we host on here. So you just register that one time through our website. It's like a TicketBud registration link. And then after that, you are good to go. You just log into the system, and when there is a webinar going on, you'll see that green banner up at the top of the screen, just like you did today, and you'll be able to join. We have moved our recorded webinars archive off of Adobe, and it is now on our YouTube channel. That link was already put into the chat a little bit earlier, but I'll post all the links again. And we hope you can check out our upcoming events. You can find us on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, Twitter. We have our in-house produced podcast, the Hopathanga Native American podcast. You can listen to that on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, and Simplecast. And then if you prefer to actually watch the video interviews with our guests, you can find that on our YouTube channel. But thank you guys so much for coming on today. I hope that everybody stays safe, especially if you are being affected by Hurricane Milton. But we are going to go ahead and bid you adieu, and everybody have a fantastic rest of your day. Thank you so much for coming on. I'm going to go ahead and close the recording. It doesn't look like there are any questions happening in the chat, Will, but I'm going to hang back for a second because I do see that some folks are typing. And y'all, I'm going to put those links for you in the chat just one more time, but note that they are in the shared notes section that's just below the chat. Here we go. All right, y'all. Oh, thank you so much, Linda. Y'all stay safe as well. So all the links I just put in, the webinar feedback survey, the weekly newsletter so you can know when the webinars are happening, our LinkedIn. There is a link that you can bookmark so that you can easily log on to this website so that you can join and check out webinars as they're happening. And then also that link to register for the free emergency management training for tribal housing, and will be our instructor for that. All right, folks, I'm going to stop the recording. And I'm going to close out the live class. Everybody have a fantastic rest of your day and stay safe. Thanks again, Will.
All right, thank you. Have a great day.
You as well. Take care.